The chair recognizes the honourable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise on behalf of the strong and resilient people of Marco City who sent me to this place to represent their concerns and in pursuit of their dreams and aspirations. They and the delegates of our National Party Convention share at least one thing in common, Madam Speaker. Twice now, they've chosen me to lead this cause, and I've done so to the chagrin of the members opposite, who no doubt were hoping, no, Madam Speaker, praying for a different result. As the saying often attributed to Mark Twain, it seems that the rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. I thank God for His grace. I thank the people of Marco City for their continuing generous support and my party's support. Madam Speaker, I thank them all today for the resounding vote of confidence in my leadership. We have work to do, Madam Speaker, and that work continues today as I speak on the 2024-2025 budget that is before us. We promise the Bahamian people we will not squander the opportunity to govern differently and better. Madam Speaker, this budget is a continuing tale of squandered opportunities. Yes. When the member for Kent Island took office in September of 2021, the Bahamian economy was already open and experiencing impressively strong recovery. This is why the economy grew by an estimated 14% in 2021. Madam Speaker, 14% growth is almost 700% more than the government projected growth for this year, and more than 700 than is projected growth for the next several years. Every year since then, Madam Speaker, the economy growth has slowed and slowed significantly, now returning to around a growth rate of about 2%. No matter how much the member for Kent Island gets up on stages saying otherwise, the truth is not on his side in this case. The truth is that when he took office, he met an economy on the rise, in strong recovery, and granted he and his party the opportunity to do some good things on behalf of the Bahamian people. He and they have squandered, Madam Speaker, that opportunity. They've dropped the ball. That rapidly recovering economy, buoyed by millions of tourists eager to take a break from home following their shutdown during COVID, allowed them to see substantial rise in revenue. Despite them, and many more millions of dollars in revenue poured into the Treasury, the government has fallen short. They came to office, Madam Speaker, on September 16, 2021, but some 3 months into the 2021-2022 budget period, they waited. And it's only at that time that they cut VAT, Madam Speaker, almost 3 months later. Despite this, they gained almost $700 million more in revenue compared to 2020 and 2021, and almost $1 billion with a B more compared to the same period, $1 billion. No COVID, no Dorian. This is how much they gained. Madam Speaker, the people's tax money was pouring in. And what did this administration do with all that money? Madam Speaker, among the various things that they did, which we considered in some cases to be a mixed up priorities, they went on a reckless spending spree. How? The member for Kent Island and the oversized entourages, they flew all over the world, lavishly living off the people's money. His cabinet colleagues followed suit. They paid millions of undisclosed dollars to former parliamentarians accused under the former administration of various acts, and fortunately for them and their family, they were acquitted. But we took issue, not with that, but so much with the undisclosed amounts that have been paid to them and any number of public servants, Madam Speaker. We saw no justification for undisclosed amounts, some we understand to be in the millions. Madam Speaker, what they also did was they brought back scores of very senior former public servants who we celebrate. And Madam Speaker, we appreciate their contributions, but we did not and do not believe they should have been brought back as line staff, clogging up the system, preventing upward mobility. They could have come in some other capacity, if at all. They have given scores of consultancies and contracts without following the proper procurement laws of the country to take care, oftentimes, of political operatives. They entered a host of no bid, no request for proposal, public-private partnerships, the terms of which remain undisclosed to today. We don't know the interest rate, the fees, and the expenses of which fall, all of which fall on the backs of Bahamian taxpayers will have to pay for years to come, while this government still refused to state what are the terms of these off-the-book multi-year liabilities. These are essentially loans. They do not qualify under the definition of public-private partnership, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have laid that policy in the House. The government has never laid one of their own, so we are assuming that they have adopted the one that we have put on the table. And Madam Speaker, that does not make provisions for undisclosed terms of these agreements, which we know to be loans that our children and our children's children will have to pay back. Nor does the public-private partnership policy permits consistent single sourcing, that is, no competitive bidding, Madam Speaker. Yes, they went on a spending spree with little to show for it. Where is the better crime situation that they assured us that they would be able to deliver? Where is it, Madam Speaker?
Nowhere.
Where's the better employment situation in the country, particularly for young Bahamians who, those that are not unemployed, many of them are underemployed, and where are the better roads in our pothole-infested New Providence and many of our family islands? Where are the new and improved schools, Madam Speaker? Can you touch the new hospital, Grand Bahama or Freeport? Is it here now? Or they say it's coming, Madam Speaker. And the multiple clinics, every administration have had numerous clinics across the Bahamas at varying stages of completion. There's nothing new about that, Madam Speaker. Where are the dialysis machines and the mammogram machines 2.5 years in? Where's the completion of the emergency room? And Madam Speaker, we can go on. Can you, for a moment, can you experience the low fuel costs or the power reliability? Where is it? Why are people in Eleuthera and Michael and Eastern New Providence, in Western New Providence, actually all over New Providence? Where's that relief and reliability and better price for fuel? Where, Madam Speaker, is the new day? The brochures of a new day are pretty. The social media handles of a new day are slick. The ads are indeed stylish.
Good.
But are the people of the country feeling pretty or handsome? Are they as slick and stylish as these brochures and commercials? No, people are hurting. On this street, you would hear people often say, hungry mouth got to feed, and this government ain't about feeding it. Their generals eat well, but the money don't trickle down, the benefits don't trickle down to their supporter. The answer is no, Madam Speaker. Some people say, hell no. In a Pintard administration, Madam Speaker, things will be different, decidedly different. We will not tax the people.
Yes.
We will not tax the people's breadbasket items, medical services, and insurance, and boast of increasing revenue from it. When the economy yields its strength in revenue, we will return that increase to the people in genuine improvements in the services like healthcare and education and public infrastructure and public safety. We would improve the social safety net, and we will spur economic prosperity. Madam Speaker, we take no delight in saying we are in the midst, contrary to what is asserted on the other side, in the midst of a struggling economy. Madam Speaker, I said it earlier, the member for Kidd Island met an impressively recovering economy when he came to office. Well, he, by his own budget numbers, is presiding over a struggling economy, Madam Speaker. Under his watch, the economy has gone from a growth rate of 17.8% in real terms, fiscal year 2021-2022, to 6.7% in fiscal year 2022-2023, down to a projected, Madam Speaker, here it is, 1.1% this fiscal year, a projected 1.7% next fiscal year, and less than 2% growth for the next 2 fiscal periods. This is bad news for the Bahamian people, Madam Speaker. Bad news. For all that talk, down to 1.7% and less than 2% growth for the next 2 fiscal periods. These growth levels are among the lowest we have seen. Those who boast of turning around the economy now seems powerless to lift the economy above 2% for the next several years. Last year, government's own fiscal strategy report, 2024, just released, shows that the country is expected this year to grow at a pace of 2.2%. For the fiscal year, the government projects growth of 1.7%. That's what's on the horizon, and then 1.5% moving forward. The World Bank, Madam Speaker, publication Global Economic Prospects for June 2024, just released a few days ago, made this point. They noted that the countries within the Caribbean region, excluding Guyana, were on an average expected growth path of 3.9% in 2024 and 4% in 2025. They project that countries like Barbados will grow at 3% and Dominican Republic will grow at 5% in 2024. For the Bahamas, in 2024, the World Bank is forecasting a growth of just 2.3%. This means that on average, our Caribbean counterparts will have an economic growth rate of some 70% higher than the Bahamas. For 2025, the forecast is even worse. What does that mean to the person in Key West Street or Melbourne Road in Yellow Elder or in Mount Pleasant or in Camp Road? It means more joblessness, more underemployment, no wage increase for tens of thousands of struggling workers. And it's worse for those who've been laid off by this administration. Less business profits, especially for small and medium-sized businesses that can ill afford it. Less government revenue, Madam Speaker, except where a compassionless government brings down the hammer on its people to squeeze blood out of the tax rock. They love the tax rock. It means higher deficits. This low growth rate means higher national debt, more suffering for many already suffering Bahamians. In the face of this, Madam Speaker, the 2024-2025 budget offers no plan to address this situation. That's why we come here, to hear what those plans are that will alter the path that we are presently on. Where are the fiscal policy measures to encourage growth? Oh, duty relief on CMOS. Love CMOS, but it isn't nearly enough. Duty exemption on drones. Millions of dollars increase spend on consultancies. The PM and his ministers have provided no economic plan and no policy initiatives to change the structural obstacles, the impediments that have locked this country into a low growth mode. I would have approached this, Madam Speaker, and we will approach it differently. I would have looked to do things that would lift us into a higher growth mode that would affect all citizens. In other words, Madam Speaker, we believe it would have made more sense to create more decent employment opportunities for first-time job seekers, more opportunities for career advancement for existing workers, more growth in real wages, Madam Speaker. Many Bahamians are facing a fall in their living standards, notwithstanding, Madam Speaker, the amendment to the Minimum Wage Act. One hand, give it, bad governance, take away the benefits of such an increase. Madam Speaker, we should have been discussing more about new entrepreneurial and investment opportunities. less government deficit and more national growth and less taxes on the people. More money should have been available to invest in core infrastructure and community infrastructure that create vibrant neighborhoods, settlements, and cities across our country. Our economy roared back in 2021, Madam Speaker, after it reopened, in part because of sound economic decisions made by our administration during the pandemic to provide, Madam Speaker, support for all businesses to make payroll, by extending unemployment benefits and by making available millions of dollars in soft loans to small businesses. We are still awaiting the $50 million in business grants this government promised. Just as in other countries in the region and around the world, the intervention of the F&M government in the domestic economy set the table for what the PLP is now seeking to take credit for, which is an economic resounding rebound. Madam Speaker, yet, although the PLP inherited this rebounding economy, they have squandered it. They talk about challenging the status quo. Madam Speaker, we're about the business of changing the status quo. With all the PR and communications might that they have, they never explained to the Bahamian people that it was forced, that is, this administration was forced to revise its economic growth forecast for the fiscal year 2023 and 2024 from 5.5% to 1.1% by the time we got to February or the midterm statement. For all the things they love to promote, they missed this little fact that they, not us, not international agencies alone, but they revised the forecast for the fiscal year from 5.5% to 1.1%. And they never admitted that I'd raised, Madam Speaker, some months ago, that this year's projections would have been off and in a substantial way. I warned the House of Assembly, the same House of Assembly, that the World Bank's forecast for a slowdown in the global economic growth meant that their 5.5% forecast for real growth was entirely unrealistic and unattainable. Of course, with an unrealistic growth forecast came unrealistic revenue forecasts. That again, one of the reasons you would give unrealistic revenue forecasts is because you know you've just delivered to the public unrealistic growth forecasts. One thing must follow the other. They have now finally come to accept, Madam Speaker, that this and they have been saying a number of things that simply don't add up. The math is not mathing. Saying that the revenue will come in closer to $3.1 billion had to give way to the fact that $3.3 billion would not be attained. So, again, Madam Speaker, they have had to come to terms that their projections were off, and it will be off again in short order. With lower economic growth comes slower growth in the tax revenue. This is something, Madam Speaker, that even first-year economic students or majors know and understand. Yet they're often condescending when they refer to us in our view of the economy and what they are doing and ought to do. And even though in this fiscal year, the government is projecting a slowdown in economic growth to just 1.7%, it is miraculously, it seems, expecting a spike or an increase in revenue intake of $400 million up to $3.5 billion. Madam Speaker, how is it possible that you revise your figures from your forecast in growth from 5.5% down to 1.7%, and yet you expect a spike in revenue? Madam Speaker, again, we know it is pure fantasy and fiction. Clearly, I'm not the only writer in the Parliament. There are other writers. On that side, they are primarily writers of fiction. Madam Speaker, they project a 13% boost in revenue from just 1.7% real growth. Again, as with this fiscal year, the revenue next fiscal year will underperform projections, and the government will absolutely, once again, not meet the targets. Now, for them, that may not be a major thing, but for the Bahamians who are depending on all of us, who are making economic decisions on the basis of what we project, it is sad news. That means a deficit and not a surplus. That means more debt on the backs of Bahamians. Of course, the Davis administration needs rosy revenue projections to fund their ever-growing appetite for spending money. This is a government that likes to spend, and then they spend some more. Worse, they have little to show for their ever-increasing spending. No pandemic, no Dorian. What have they done that you could touch and feel? The last fiscal year before the pandemic and Dorian was a fiscal year 2018-2019. Combined recurrent and capital spending, Freetown, was near $2.65 billion. $2.65 billion. This upcoming budget, Davis administration is projecting a spend of more than $3.61 billion. That is $960 million, or almost a billion with a B, more than was necessary to fund the government just 6 years ago. As a share of GDP, the combined spending in 2018-2019 was 21.1% of GDP, and it has grown to become 23.8% of GDP. That means that even adjusted for growth in the economy since then, the Davis administration continues to grow the size of the government inside the Bahamian economy. The folks who earn far less requires more of residents and of businesses. So today, we have a government that is looking to spend $1 billion more than that was necessary to spend before Dorian and the pandemic. Bahamians are asking, can we see and feel where this extra $1 billion in spending has gone? Carmichael, if you were a wrestling fan, you said, can you see what the Davis administration is cooking? That's what The Rock wants to know. The answer is that we cannot tell, because we have an extravagant and wasteful government that is convinced that they do not have to tell the Bahamian people how they are spending their money, even when the law requires that we do. It's time for a real conversation about economic recovery. But this is also the point. Without a plan for robust economic and fiscal changes led by Bahamian entrepreneurs and Bahamian private sector, we will continue to see the government plodding along, spending more and more of the nation's treasure, and with less and less return to the Bahamian people. Madam Speaker, real economic recovery is necessary. We need to increase the growth rate of our economy, and we need to spread the gains across our population so that young and not so young, Nasuvians and family islanders, men and women, will all be the beneficiaries of a robust economy. We need to make sure that everybody on this road eats. We need to create more resiliency in our economy, ensuring that future generations are not only proud of their home, but want to live here, want to stay here. And if they're away, they wish to come back home because they believe that there are opportunities that are not dependent on who they are politically connected to. We don't do so by fixing up our political allies only. We don't do so with no-bid contracts and flying all over the place, enjoying people's money with little or nothing to show for it. We do not do this by virtually selling off critical national assets in non-transparent ways. We do not do this by endless public relations and photo ops for big foreign investment projects that never seem to get off the ground, no matter how many shovels you jerk in the ground. We cannot talk about economic development and economic advancement unless and until we are addressing the needs of the unemployed in our nation, especially the masses of young people in desperate need of work, or in the countless communities where I grew up, where many of us grew up, where we should have special affection for what people are experiencing. We cannot talk about economic development and economic advancement if it does not include addressing the dire housing situation that exists in a number of our family islands. In New Providence, in Exuma, in Abercorn, Lutra, and in several other islands, the cost to rent or to own something that is both acceptable and affordable is beyond the reach of far too many Bahamians. Wherever the government makes progress in this regard, we applaud them and we will assist. We will not stand in the way of that progress, but we know that much more needs to be done. We all accept that decent, affordable housing and home ownership are the bedrock elements of any striving society. Indeed, home ownership is the foundation of a thriving middle class. Yet even young professionals with decent earnings are finding themselves unable to afford their first home. What this administration says it is doing cannot cut it. It's a step in the right direction, but again, we're not moving at the pace or at the scale that is necessary. This is why our administration will work with pension funds and investment funds and financial institutions to develop a national real estate investment trust, a REIT, as a public-private partnership where the National Investment Fund will provide public land and financial support to help mobilize the hundreds of millions of dollars to support the construction and refurbishment of thousands of affordable home units necessary to meet the current and emerging demands. There was a time, decades ago, where PLP and F&M administrations oversaw the construction of thousands of affordable units by the public and private sector each year. Those Pindling and Ingram administrations rose to the challenge. Our administration will resume that kind of housing revolution. Madam Speaker, we're in the midst of the budget debate, and truly, this is about how we spend our money. Nothing better reflects a government's priorities and focus than how it spends its money. What we know is that this administration loves to spend, but its focus is woefully off. It's suspect. This 2024-2025 budget, like the current budget, shows no clear spending focus or priority. So if you ask different ministers in separate rooms, what is the focus and priority of the government, you are almost guaranteed to get separate answers from the same persons who meet every Tuesday. In fact, in some ways, this government spending is puzzling. For example, while crime is a huge issue in this country, the Royal Bahamas Police Force will get a proposed increase in the new budget of about $50,000, while the Ministry of National Security, curiously, and I'm sure it'll be answered later, will get an increase of $7 million. And the Royal Bahamas Defense Force will get some $5 million. While our young people struggle to find work and yearn for ways to stay out of trouble and to realize their goals, the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture gets a decrease in its budget of about $1 million, and the Department of Education gets an increase of only about $7 million, while its ministry gets an increase of about $8,000. I said I must have misread that because I'm sure that figure, but I'm sure the member may clarify that. But as significant a threat as hurricanes are annually to our way of life, and despite telling the world that the Bahamas is burning and begging for help, the government has given the Ministry of National Disaster an increase of only $538,000. $538,000. Overall spending in the upcoming budget will be about $170 million more. And it's clear from what we have seen and what is proposed that the Bahamian people will hardly see it. And contrary to what they were saying yesterday, we know they ain't gonna feel it. They may hear about it, and it may touch them in wrong ways, but they won't feel it in ways that's beneficial to them in general. Madam Speaker, we can do better. We must do better. When we come to office, with God's grace and our collaboration with the Bahamian people, we will do better. We will move forward stronger as a country. Madam Speaker, the Bahamian people want leaders who will talk straight to them, who will be straight with them. They do not want an administration that brags about being ahead in revenue projections, which incidentally is not the case, but is struggling to pay small home repair contractors and other small vendors in this country, struggling to pay many Bahamian vendors, which is why many of them are now asking you to pay in cash. When we come to office, Madam Speaker, we will not gaslight the public. We won't tell them that what they are seeing and hearing is not real. They won't see their electricity bills go up, and we try to convince them that it's not. They won't see us stop a fuel hedge program, and we tell them that we did not, or we didn't get the package, we didn't know. We wouldn't pull a shaggy on them. We won't let them hear us say that we don't care about the Freedom of Information Act, and then tell them later we do. Which is it? They won't hear us say that, that women's groups did not express concerns about the gender violence bill, and then tell not only the public, but tell the women that, I'm sure that's what you said. We believe gaslighting of the public will end with our administration in power. So don't take my advice. Keep doing what you're doing. In time, it'll pay off. Our governance will be characterized by a number of things that are very different, Madam Speaker. One, we believe that it's one thing to have transformative ideas, it's another thing to execute. And this administration, on a number of fundamental issues, not all, have an execution problem. Truly transformative ideas are needed to stimulate significant economic growth and development, and to change the social condition of our people. It needs to be sustained, and it needs to be large enough to awaken the spirit of a people who are yearning for better, for those that are home and those that are abroad wanting to contribute to this country, who want the tribalism to end, and for opportunities to be open for them to contribute no matter what side of the political divide that they're on. They want, Madam Speaker, they want an investment promotion program and a mobilization of hundreds of millions of dollars towards entrepreneurial ideas that can increase the production of products and services to meet our consumer needs at home and abroad. And we make a commitment to be intentional and disciplined and collaborative with our people, and not, again, target them when they come to town meetings and make constructive criticisms. Even when we don't like it, we will hear them because we understand we work for them. We want to work with persons of all political stripes, and we want to work with institutions of goodwill in this country and those outside. We would have a dogged emphasis on the creation of a safe, secure, and prosperous country, and we'll reflect this in our approach to how we put together our budget. Our priorities will be reflected in the allocations in every line item. So, for example, if we say we care about the disabled, we will not, if only temporarily, move money from that line item to some other line item, especially for travel, gratuitous travel. Our pursuit of economic and social policies that leverage public assets, including Crown land, to create sustained wealth and increase standard of living for Bahamians throughout the Bahamas will be our priority, and it will be reflected in our approach to putting together our budget. The budget should really lead to a fairer and more equitable tax policy regime that will seek to minimize the burden on those who are least able to pay. And for all the talk about this matter by the Progressive Liberal Party, there has been no real movement in terms of dealing with equitable tax for Bahamians. It is a subject they refuse to touch. Greater powers, we believe, ought to be allocated to local government bodies throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, including specific budgetary provisions to undertake capital repairs and improvements in local communities. There should be honest and transparent government driven by a merit-based public service and independent, nonpartisan mechanisms that promote and ensure accountable governance. We will be committed to greater independence of the boards, and legislatively, we want to make adjustments so that civil society will have a say in who's appointed to boards as well. We need secure communities that corporate, civic organizations, community leaders, and others will work in tandem to come up with strategies and initiatives for community building. Madam Speaker, we believe that we should leverage technology in order to create safer spaces for our residents. We should have an open, accessible, rules-based approach to Bahamian and foreign investment. Too often, local and international investors are complaining about a moving goalpost, that certain things are asked for, they see it online, and then they find only that they will be requested to do additional things that were never mentioned, whether on our website or in initial discussions with government officials. We can and must be better. We have to radically simplify and streamline the Bahamian public sector bureaucracy so that we could ensure that residents are able to seamlessly interact with each of our ministries, whether online or in person, with a spirit that shows that we understand as public servants, from policymakers to those who work in respective ministries, that we work for them. When we fail to streamline our operations, it's costing us untold millions, loss of business to other jurisdictions, and of course, it's fueling corruption. We have to end this situation where in the Bahamas, the view is the wheels of the system only move by grease. Madam Speaker, we have real work to do. And so I wish to share just a few of the policy positions, Madam Speaker, that we intend to commit ourselves to. And Madam Speaker, on Monday, we will then release a more fulsome list of the policy positions because, Madam Speaker, I would not want to give the entire list now because I really would like to get to the privatization of BPL. Madam Speaker, it is an issue that have thousands of Bahamians fretting, talking, asking as if they were in an Anglican church singing that hymn, "How Could It Be?" Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, yeah, the first part. We only talking about the first part. How could it be? Madam Speaker, we will, without delay, number one, without delay, fully implement the Public Procurement Act and immediately begin to publish the names of all persons and companies who are awarded government contract as required by law, Madam Speaker. The government of today is not about that kind of business. We will heed the recommendations made over and over by our Auditor General in his reports to increase the amount of qualified Bahamian accountants assigned to the department to allow him or her to fulfill their constitutional role. Unlike the Progressive Liberal Party, who seemingly take issue with a number of the reports, which is quite odd because certainly the Auditor General, who has been in place for the last more than a decade, he's been an equal opportunity critic of both administrations, only to ensure that all of us follow the regulations as required by law. But nevertheless, this administration has permitted persons to savage the office unnecessarily. Thirdly, we will amend the law to move the Auditor General under a new Parliamentary Services Commission or a similar body. Because here's the goal. So we don't want to be lost on just the name of that body alone, but we need a mechanism so that we are able to bring the office fully under the Speaker of the House of Assembly. The Auditor General does not answer to the Prime Minister or to the Cabinet, and as such, we will take further steps to enhance the statutory independence of that office. We want a parliament that has independence. And that's why we are prepared to stand our ground in this place, because we expect no less as members of the opposition. We deserve equal treatment and fair play under the law. We want to make sure that no executive in this country will treat the third arm of government like a pop-down entity, or yet as another ministry or extension of the executive. 4, we will fully implement the Ombudsman Act. We know that the government came and passed it. We have not seen any serious movement to fully enact it. And of course, Madam Speaker, if you have policymakers who are haughty in spirit, who are thin-skinned, we know that they will dread an ombudsman office. And we believe, Madam Speaker, that under our administration, we would move post-haste to make it happen. 5, upon coming to office, we will introduce legislation that requires all cabinet ministers and appointed board members of state-owned enterprises to commit to an ethical code of conduct that will speak clearly to improper behavior, conflicts of interest, and receiving of any material benefit by virtue of their office. So, Madam Speaker, we believe that there are any number of provisions that we have to enact if we're going to send the right message to the local and the international community that we are serious about accountability and transparency in the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, we will take immediate steps to remove VAT from core healthy food items, from medicines, from infant care items, and women's sanitary products. We will pay for this by putting back the additional VAT on expensive, high-end, million-dollar properties and putting, Madam Speaker, the tax back on those particular vessels and pleasure crafts that were removed by the PLP. Yes. Madam Speaker, we cannot talk about improving Family Island's infrastructure and Family Island's economic prospects without the accompanying financial infrastructure. Some have taken issue with this recommendation, but we stand by it. We will bring back bank branches in our major Family Islands. We just came back from Long Island Regatta, and I'm certain we were not the only ones. The Minister of Local Government probably heard the same thing. In fact, we heard the minister who's responsible for the post office made the point just yesterday that many Bahamians are asking for banks, for places where they are able to securely put their money and to open up accounts. And we believe that there's a mechanism to do it. We do not seek to force commercial banks to take decisions that they don't want, but we can, in fact, incentivize them. Yes, we can incentivize them and collaborate with them in ensuring that there are also brick and mortar structures that are available to help the unbanked residents in the Family Islands. Alongside that, we will increase the education to make sure that mobile money is understood and can be utilized, and that the sand dollar has wider use and is in circulation. But in addition to that, Long Island, Cat Island, Family Islands throughout this country deserve to have a bank. And we don't expect that banks are going to lose money. The government can, through looking at rebates in terms of business licenses, offset a portion of the expenses that banks would have to pay to ensure that it's a win-win situation for our citizens. We will improve the ease of doing business. We will reduce the regulations that continue to tie businesses up in this country. There's no reason for businesses in Grand Bahama to get approvals for simple operations there and investments, local or international, and have to then come to the cabinet of the Bahamas in New Providence to be held up or for political eyes and hands to affect the conclusion of those arrangements. It ought to stop. As other countries have done, we will ensure that the red carpet is rolled out for Bahamians in much the same way it had been rolled out for expats in the past. Madam Speaker, we need to create greater opportunities for our young people to ensure that they can access grant funding or equity investment in their businesses. We have to better consolidate the Small Business Development Center, the Bahamas Development Bank, the Venture Capital Fund, and to work with private venture capitalists in order to make sure that adequate funding is made available to our young people. Madam Speaker, we will reintroduce the Young Professionals Program in the public service, both to recruit new college graduates into the public service and to develop the young professionals that are there. Madam Speaker, there's much we can do to inspire our young people when they graduate from university to come back home. We have to sweeten the pot. Madam Speaker, the Bahamian private sector needs to do a better job as well in providing opportunities for young, talented Bahamians. We will work with the private sector organizations to ensure that the opportunities and skill gaps are identified, documented, publicized, and that we engage in a national effort to identify talent that can be developed to fill particular roles. Madam Speaker, I support the Saxons, and I'm praying for and working with Deputy Cartwright so that he can make the transition as well, Madam Speaker. While in Cabinet, we We approved the construction of multi-purpose Junkanoo shacks that are world-class locations where Junkanoo products can be created, where performances can be carried out. We made a commitment also to ensure that every Junkanoo group, every major Junkanoo group would have land. It is a part of revolutionizing, Madam Speaker, the orange economy. And so, Madam Speaker, that is one of the things that we are absolutely committed to. Committed to working with the Junkanoo community and the Festivals Committee to create a massive festival stadium, a place where you can monetize these large audiences that are often gather, who have no means of truly paying to reinvest in those particular art forms, Madam Speaker. We will implement Invest Bahamas and complete that initiative that the F&M had advanced when we were booted out of office, Madam Speaker. And this coming week, I would elaborate more on that particular issue. Madam Speaker, we will change what has now emerged as a tortured and difficult environment for business to deal with under this administration. Madam Speaker, imagine for a moment you are required to pay this year's fees, and the government is really asking you to estimate what next year's fees will be, and you have to pay those fees as well.
Wrong.
This administration is an albatross around the necks of Bahamian business persons. And the sad part about it is that it's not an administration that has a good track record of dealing with Bahamian resources in what we believe is a responsible way. Yet those who every day get up and, to borrow a phrase from our chaplain, they are going to the people who make it rain with buckets to collect it before it even leaves the clouds. This administration, Madam Speaker, has to do better. After spending what is in the Treasury, the public's pocket, they are now diving into the business community pocket, small, medium, and large businesses. And every now and again, as they would do in this debate, they would then say, well, we are speaking up for the businesses. No, we are speaking up for the Bahamian consumer who will feel the price. Because with the new BPL prices that will come and the ones that are on their backs right now, businesses will simply pass on the expense to the public. The increased rates, they will pass on to the public. So the consumer, the people we say we love, care about, will work on their behalf. They will end up feeling the pressure. And Madam Speaker, there's no way in the Bahamas our people would be able to become owners of this economy if we continue to tax them out of business. Madam Speaker, it is often tragic when persons who have no history or very little history in business end up in positions where they could affect the livelihoods of businesses and then choose to do it in a negative way. I'm sure, Madam Speaker, it is unintentional, but nevertheless, it is harmful, Madam Speaker. And so our administration will seek to ease the way in which we do business. We would accelerate the pace of digitization of the public service. We have started some wonderful programs. My Gateway is but one of those projects. We believe that we have to move with a greater sense of urgency to make sure that those projects are completed, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just before I turn my attention to BPL, Madam Speaker, I used to be in the construction business for a period of time, and it takes entirely too long to get a plan approved. It's worse for subdivisions, and it's even worse, Madam Speaker, for larger projects. And so we recommend to the Minister of Work that we really need a revolution in terms of the approval processes. There are a number of private engineers who are suitably qualified, who have the required indemnification, who can in fact approve many of these projects that we are wasting time sending to the Ministry of Works. We have to work out a system that somehow we are able to get these projects to move a lot sooner, to have approvals. We have to make sure that the Ministry of the Environment and the both administrations have again strangled so many projects, have delayed projects for an inordinate amount of time. Capital will go where capital is able to flow and gain results. And the longer we hold persons up in approvals for occupancy, or Mr. Minister for Central and Saudi Lusra, or hold them up because we are putting additional requirements on them beyond the simple environmental impact assessments. We are shooting ourselves in the foot. It is important for us to streamline these processes so that we are able to approve projects, small and large, in a more timely fashion. We should set timelines in order for us to get this done. And if we don't have the right persons in place, we have to switch them in areas where they could better serve the community and put other persons in place who could, in fact, get the job done. We heard some announcements yesterday that has been troubling to so many Bahamians. And so this week, we intend to have a comprehensive press conference to examine what was proposed by the Minister with responsibility for energy. And so I want to give a preliminary response to what has been set out by the Minister. And if time permits, or if the Speaker would give me the additional hour that is required, and I do believe the Speaker owes me some time, then I would be able to elaborate on BPL and a few other matters. Madam Speaker, BPL is a part of our patrimony. The Free National Movement has a rich history of being committed to privatization in the right areas. When I was in Cabinet, our Prime Minister agreed in the privatization of a number of state-owned enterprises within the ministry. The government has decided to reverse those positions, but again, there is a Cabinet conclusion for the privatization of packing houses and feed mill. Philosophically, we are different, and so I understand that and I respect that. But we believe it's the right thing to do to privatize a number of those enterprises in the Ministry of Agriculture and other ministries. There are a number of them. So we do not take issue with the possibility of privatization of a BPL. What we do take issue with is the manner in which it is being done by this administration, which is a disservice to the Bahamian people. And so let me just briefly comment on this, and with the additional hour I would get, I want to break it down in detail. BPL, by whatever name you wish to call it, is in the midst of a privatization exercise. The government has sought to slip into the budget debate a privatization process under some other name. The opposition will have much more to say on this, but given the minister's presentation and the information reported in the press, it is important to make some preliminary observations. In March of this year, the Prime Minister promised the country that in no way or fashion would BPL be privatized as a part of his or their reform. Lo and behold, some 3 months later, the press first reported, and then the minister confirmed, that $100 million worth of sovereign assets are being transferred for a quarter a century or longer from the state control and ownership to private control and majority ownership. So that the government could avoid getting out of a jam by trying to use semantics, let's define privatization. No less an authority on the meaning of words than Cambridge Dictionary defines privatization as follows: the act of selling an industry company or service that was owned and controlled by the government so it becomes privately owned and controlled. So selling the state-owned transmission and distribution network for a minority stake in a business that will be majority owned and controlled by the private sector, absolutely. In South and Central Andros, in Garden Hills, in Pinewood, in Nassau Village, in any part of the Bahamas is privatization. Again, it will continue to be privatization until it's returned to majority ownership under control of the state. So let's get that out of the way. At least 100 million worth of BPL assets have been privatized. The Bahamian people can decide for themselves if the Prime Minister and his team are being completely honest and open when they make the claim that BPL is not being privatized. Second, while there are some elements of this reform exercise which went to competitive bidding, and even that I will come back to in a moment, because the date was rather curious. The matter was already in the public domain, and then they identified a date that came later. That sounds like the consistent retroactive action. Request for proposal, after it was discovered with the public, and there was a public outcry, oops, let's go back and issue a request for proposal. There are other critical elements for which the procurement law was completely and utterly ignored. The government is trying to use the excuse that IRCA gave them permission to do single sourcing. However, the non-objection from IRCA to BPL outsourcing efforts does not give the government any license to suspend the requirements of the Public Procurement Act 2023. The act brought to Parliament by this very administration stipulates at the very outset in Clause 1 that save for the limited exception detailed in the act shall apply to all procurement carried out by the procuring entity. Following from this are specific provisions, such as Section 21, that requires competitive bidding in all but several narrow circumstances. Most critically, the law enshrines what are referred to as principles of procurement, which apply to central government and to all state-owned enterprises and authorities, inclusive of BPL. The second principle of procurement states the following: competitive supply. Public procurement must be carried out by competitive process, and unless specifically justified in accordance with this act and government policy. In essence, the law binds the government to pursue competitive bidding, which is a stranger to this administration. The reason this guiding principle is the law is what brings us to the crux of this matter we're discussing. Let's look at just the outsourcing of transmission and distribution network. The government is about to enter into a 25-year obligation involving hundreds of millions of dollars of state assets on a critical element of our public infrastructure, hundreds of millions. The enormity of the undertaking and the need to do it as effectively and as cost efficiently as possible should have moved this government, absent of an open and transparent competitive bidding process, to raise this issue with the general public and staff, to talk about the vision, and then proceed with a request for proposal so that all and sundry can get involved. Knowing some of the players, we have no doubt they would do a wonderful job in terms of maybe lowering the cost. But we don't know if it is the best cost the Bahamians could have gotten, because we have no other contenders who seriously were given an opportunity in a timely fashion to enter the bidding process. So a retroactive listing of companies that was looking at the possibility of bidding on this will not do. And as far as we know, unless they can lay documents showing otherwise, a fair chance was not necessarily given to a wide range of companies. Without a competitive bidding process, none of us can have the assurance that the lowest possible price is what we are going to end up with. This is why we have a law in place, to make sure that to the extent possible, Bahamians get the best possible deal available. A further concern is the press reporting regarding the business relationship with some of the players in this entire enterprise. That's a discussion for another time. The only other point I will raise today on this matter is with respect to the inexplicable and indefensible shareholding arrangement. We all vividly remember that there was a time when the PLP maintained that all state assets must remain in the control of the state, and that any joint venture efforts should see the government maintain a majority control. Oh, what a difference a day makes. We remember how the PLP sought to get back a majority or equal stake in BTC, so strong were their convictions at that time. And I do believe some of those ministers are in here. Those that talk about the meek and the mild and who was quiet then, they were vocal then. Mum's the word now. That PLP is no more. The minister indicated yesterday that the valuation of the BPL transmission and distribution network was $100 million. She indicated that the private sector would be contributing $130 million. She did not detail how much of that contribution was equity or how much is debt. But this is what we know, that the breakdown of this contribution from the equity partner, from the group that is going to end up with 60%, their initial contribution is $30 million in common share equity and $100 million in preferred shares and other debt instruments. Now, I grew up in Key West Street, Washington Street, I think 7th Street too, Coconut Grove Avenue, Yellow Elder, a couple of times. Most of the brethren who I grew up with, if you give them this kind of deal, they're gonna find a way to raise that money. If you give me $100 million of Bahamian assets, and you guarantee that I have the contract, I just need to shop that around. I mean, I have a built-in arrangement that's going to give me some return on my investment. And it's amazing I did not hear Carmichael say that this, what kind of, you didn't say anything about the deal. Well, yeah, you haven't spoken yet, you'll get the comment. Now, I'm not doubting for a moment. The talent that I know is in the room, they could get some things done. But all we want is for the system to work. We take no issues with individuals. We celebrate the brilliance of our entrepreneurs that are involved in these arrangements. They have done a lot of good things for the country. What we are concerned about is the absence of competitive bidding. Yes. We are concerned about the math in this arrangement. And so we asked a couple of questions. If the value of the government equity contribution is $100 million, and the value of the private common share equity is $30 million, it would seem to us that there's no justification whatsoever for a 60% stake by the private sector participants, when they are only putting in 23% of the book value of the company on day one. Even if you take into consideration the value of the cash and the sweat equity and the expertise of that the private partners bring, the ratio of share ownership should be reversed. It should be, at a minimum, 60% government, 40% to be outsourced to the partner. And why should it just be the government? Why ordinary Bahamians can't get shares in it? I mean, truthfully, I trust, the shares and ownership in a wide group of Bahamian hands, even more so than I do in central government hands. Why is that formula not put in place? Yet we're getting into these interesting arguments about 49%, 2% to the charity of your choice. Hey, really? Your charity may be my third child basketball club. No, okay, I'm just kidding. Forget that. My point is, there is a better formula that we are able to use. There was and there is no compelling and justifiable reason for this administration to turn over $100 million of the Bahamian people's asset on such bad terms. There was then, according to them, but we are saying now today, no good reason for them to continue to insist that this action is not privatization of BPL transmission and distribution network. We will have much more to say on this particular subject. But before I leave that subject, Madam Speaker, we believe that there are some broader questions to ask, because there's also a generation side to this, Madam Speaker. There is a generation side to this whole issue, and we are deeply concerned. Madam Speaker, we do not believe, first of all, that the government should continue this bad practice of single sourcing such significant amounts of Bahamian assets, providing it to a single group with no opportunity for other Bahamians, whether alone or in strategic alliances, to have a chance to bid on it. And so let me just raise just a few questions before I transition to those incredible tourist numbers that we continue to hear about. Madam Speaker, the minister represented that we are now entering a new energy era. Madam Speaker, I'm prepared over the course of the next sitting, but if persons insist, we might do it in this sitting, to lay on the table an evaluation of BPL's assets. Now, it's my understanding that not all of the assets that BPL has are insurable. But the portion of the assets that are insurable may be somewhere around $800 million. So Madam Speaker, I'd be more than happy with that additional time you will give me to break down that particular issue.
That's your time.
Extra time.
2 hours.
2 hours. 3 hours.
It's your
2 hours
time.
extra. Thank
I ain't
you,
giving
Madam
away nothing
Speaker.
today.
Thank you very much. There are several components of the government's new energy era plan that needs to be addressed. I said yesterday that we left in place for the Prime Minister and the Minister of Energy, we left a plan. You had a brilliant board at BPL that you met in place, and in fact, you kept them for a period of time to assist you in transitioning into your new appointments. And there was a vision for the energy sector. There were a number of plans that were left in place to retire the legacy debt, to pay for, to how to improve the dilapidated infrastructure, to refine the workforce even more. And again, the government denied that it received this comprehensive plan. The plan also showed the benefit of the hedging program, which had saved us $25 million and stood to save us $55 million before the renewal period would come about. And again, the government squandered that opportunity. As a result, our prices are what they are, and they could quite possibly, in the short to medium term, go up if this arrangement continues. So today, I want to ask several questions for the government to consider. Now, while the minister is not here, I'm certain wherever she is, she's listening. There are several components of the government's new energy era plan that needs to be addressed, and in particular, the government needs to provide answers to specific questions or provide additional clarity and details regarding the specific business arrangements and contractual arrangements that are either in place or currently being negotiated. It is offensive to many Bahamians that the government only ends up having these discussions after something is leaked or the word get out. Then they feel an obligation to at least have a partial discussion on it. And true to form, they've done it over and over again. They would come to the House, as they did with the recent discussions we had on the Electricity Act. They would come to the House to amend a thing that they've already decided on before. They've already made the decision, and then they have to come here to get the blessing of the House. It's a consistent. Did it with Central Bank. They're doing it in this budget cycle for some other matters, but this is a bad habit. They're trying to make us aid and abet them in correcting bad behavior, which they've already carried out. Overall, the people of the Bahamas need to understand the full new energy strategy that's being put forth by the government, and whether all the components, parts, are being contemplated, and are they in alignment with the overall strategy, including its overall measurable goals and objectives. So let me break it down. In the case of solar power in New Providence and the Family Islands, moving towards the mix of solar and battery energy storage systems as part of the mix for electricity generation. While we believe that this could be a welcomed move, we do have a few questions. One, what is the term being considered, and put it in terms of years, of the long-term power purchase agreements for utility solar? Secondly, a varied number of companies have been selected for the solar generation under the PPA arrangement. What is the specific, that is by each island, what is the specific as well as the average all-in power purchase agreement tariff rates? This is an important matter we believe the government has to explain to the public. You see, it's one thing to disrespect the opposition in Parliament. It's another thing to disrespect members of the public who know this sector extremely well and know that the math is not matting. Things are not adding up. We want to know what is the PPA tariff rates that these vendors have proposed, and how does this number compare to the average electricity rate that BPL charges the consumer on their bill right now? What is being quoted to you, the government, how does that compare with what's being quoted right now? That's going to tell whether or not it is sustainable. That is, you sign a company up, can they sustainably and more cost-effectively provide electricity, particularly solar at this time, than the government is right now? What is the percent margin on average between what BPL will be purchasing solar power for from the vendors and the price it will be selling the power to the public? What is the percent margin or average? 4, currently, the average tariff rate to the consumer is 12.5 cents per kilowatt, and BPL can barely make a profit from this rate that is currently being charged. If under the new energy era plan, the government says it will reduce the cost of electricity for consumers, how will BPL earn enough revenue to cover its operational and capital costs moving forward? So when we get the details, that's why we're asking you, lay the documents on the table. We want to know what is it you are purchasing the power, the cost of power from the vendors that you have signed up, and then also those who you have turned over our patrimony to in terms of the generation in BPL. Are these solar power generating deals build, own, operate, and transfer? The acronym is BOOT, the BOOT deal. What type of deal is it that you're getting into? Because the deal that we heard, we didn't hear explained to us. We heard build, we heard own, we heard operate. What we didn't hear is transfer. Is there a built-in mechanism to transfer the assets back to the Bahamian people at the end of the period? Or if we agree that someone is not performing up to par, is there a transfer mechanism in the deal that we could get our assets back earlier? Yeah, that's all. I just asking for some people who will know. Most of the Bahamian people who are going to have to pay the bill. Yes, sir. Yes, yes. But it's more than just generation, in fact, because you have some other deals in this that was not mentioned fully. But we'll get into that in just a moment. Yes. And so the other question is, how long will the owners, engineers be employed to provide project oversight? And at what cost will it be provided to the Bahamian people? How long? 7, will BPL engineers also be trained to monitor and manage these utility-scale solar power generation relationships to ensure that they are performing as required over the contract term? That's what the employees are asking these questions, because one would have thought before, we heard her, but she certainly, I wasn't the only one. We weren't the only ones who didn't hear the answer properly. The workers didn't hear the answer properly, because we're only echoing what they say. Management and line staff, they seem not to have heard and appreciated the full explanation. So just, she'll have another opportunity. Well, bless the Lord. And so, number 8, Have the companies that have been selected to provide solar power received their independent power producer licenses from ERCA? Where are these companies in the process of applying and receiving licenses for ERCA? The second area, so those questions really related, Madam Speaker, to this whole question of considering the new energy era, but specifically about solar power in New Providence and Family Island. The second category of questions relate to the tariff rate adjustment and reduction. And this is a really interesting one for those of us that have to pay bills. I mentioned to one of my colleagues yesterday, and I just want him to know I was just kidding. I was saying I know he isn't that concerned because he lives home with his mummy and she just paid a bill, but he knows I was kidding. So the tariff rate adjustment and reduction, the cost is currently proposing, the government is currently proposing the following rate adjustments. One, elimination of the tariff for the first 200 kilowatt of electricity uses for all customers. Keep that number in mind. A reduction of 25 cents per kilowatt with respect to the average rate for usage between 201 to 800 kilowatts. And they're also proposing an increase of 0.015 kilowatt with respect to the average rate for usage over 800 kilowatt. Now, the minister went through this yesterday. I was absolutely convinced that these figures were designed to throw the public off, because 9 out of 10 persons wouldn't understand all of those things. But the questions should help the public today. With the elimination of a tariff for the first 200 kilowatts of usage for all customers, the government is essentially foregoing millions of dollars in revenue to BPL on a monthly basis. And this saving amounts to about $22 per customer, $22. And will cost BPL about $2.8 million in gross revenue per month. Is this so-called benefit worth it with respect to trying to maintain BPL's financial stability? Now, we want the Bahamians to have benefit, but have they given any consideration to this? Because we believe that the government has been scripted on this matter. We don't believe that this is something the cabinet sat down on and conceived. They sat down on it and considered it, but not conceived it. We believe that they are fully scripted, and they clearly do not understand all the details of this arrangement. Because if they do, then we would have to make other judgments about our colleagues, and we are not prepared to make that. We would only say we do not believe they fully understand, because this, we do not see what they're doing now as ultimately going to be beneficial on the back end for the Bahamian people. In other words, we don't believe that they're going to get value for money. And if they are going to get it and we're missing something, the minister and the prime minister may not be the best persons to explain this to us. We need the entrepreneurs to probably explain to us, to the workers, and to the population. Because thus far, what they have explained, this deal presently is not in the best interest of the Bahamian people. The assets are being turned over to others, and they are the ones in the driver's seat. And so Madam Speaker, I will just move to another set of questions. Given that the larger consumers will now pay more for electricity, given the 0.015 kilowatt increase, and most of the consumers will be small businesses, what effect do you expect this will have on the cost of doing business? Madam Speaker, most of the costs that go to businesses, they can pass on to the consumers. Absolutely. So if the government wishes to argue by this the first portion of this tariff rate, then listen, y'all don't worry, we taking care of y'all because most of y'all fall in this category, you're using too much power. Again, I didn't point out $22 a month savings. That's significant for some people, I accept that. But I'm also saying that the government will find that businesses will pass on the cost to the consumer in one of two ways. One, in all of the goods and services they get, or two, in reducing their workforce. And I do not believe the government has fully been able to think this through and had discussions with the people who can better advise them on how this deal ought to have been structured. Given the new tariff changes, Will there be an overall net increase or decrease in BPL's monthly revenue? And has this financial model been developed? Please provide the financial model, including a stress test results. 1, will BPL generate enough revenue to cover its operation and debt obligations? Will BPL be able to generate an operating profit moving forward and not have to rely on the government subvention in the years to come? We want to hear that on the record. Who will be responsible for paying BPL's current $320 million legacy debt? Who will be responsible for paying BPL's current $130 million unfunded pension liability? In terms of price stability versus fuel hedging, as we all know, the only way to provide price and cost stability to consumers is through the fuel hedging. Does the government have plans to reinstitute fuel hedging to provide lower and more predictable costs for energy in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? Is there a plan to put in place a fuel hedging program for LNG, for ADO, and for HFO? Madam Speaker, when we look at the calculation of fuel charge, it raises several questions right away. Given that the government has already put forth the various discounts that will be provided for fuel charge, how are these numbers calculated or given any validity, given the fact that BPL is still purchasing fuel through spot market pricing? Madam Speaker, there are so many questions to ask. I want to stop there and save the balance of this for our press conference this week, Madam Speaker. But the government has a very serious problem. There are thousands of Bahamians who are concerned about the arrangements that they are in fact making. The concern on the T&D side pales in comparison to the concern they have on the generation side. They have concern about the increased rental generators that are being sourced. They have concerns about the Bahamian patrimony. Imagine for a moment, you have been paying for these assets for decades and decades and decades. You've incurred debt because of the payment on this. The government appears to be taking all of these assets, certainly the vast majority of it, from what we heard, it's the generation assets as well as the T&D, and turning it over to separate groups. We want to understand how they went about doing the valuation. How did they calculate that? And how did they arrive at the teams that they arrived at to take over? And what role would the government play now in this mix of having a management company, a T&D company, and a generation company? How are they going to work in tandem with each other? And what role would the government be playing in the midst of all of this? And what portion of the ongoing responsibility, liability, and bills the Bahamian people will be left with? We just want to understand. So we don't wish to throw a monkey wrench in anything. What we need to do is understand. What the minister explained, what the prime minister explained, has not provided clarity on this. And the portion we do understand, we know that they're wrong. We know that for a fact. You don't bring $100 million to the table. And that's only on the T&D side, which we have far more confidence in. And so we are very much concerned about the arrangement that the government has entered into. And so again, Madam Speaker, because time is going, these questions we will put on the public record this coming week, all of these questions. And we're going to put it out to the public, because we know when we come and ask the questions in here, it's like wasting time, because this government has really no desire to explain to the Bahamian people those things that relate to how they are spending our money. Madam Speaker, I wish to turn my attention for a moment to Grand Bahama. Madam Speaker, the government has in this budget a curious figure. I have to find it, Madam Speaker. $75 million the government expects to get from the GBPA, Madam Speaker. $75 million. Now, we have, just to refresh the public mind, we've been asking the government to lay on the table the invoice that it has submitted to GBPA. Because clearly, if GBPA owes us money, by all means, we want them to pay. We have more interest in a functional GBPA than the guys who live in Nassau and seem to have very little interest in the transformation of Grand Bahama. We have 3 members of parliament. We're about to go up to 5 shortly, Madam Speaker. So we have an interest. We have an interest, Madam Speaker, in Grand Bahama. And so, Madam, Madam Speaker, we understand that they haven't seen you for a while in the West. But Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, if for example, Madam Speaker, GBPA owes $75 million. What bothers me is the government refused to put the invoice on the table. They haven't even called us in a private meeting and say, listen, we need to be on the same page with this, because we have no more interest in GBPA than we do in the Progressive Liberal Party. I mean, we don't have any interest. We are interested in what happens with our constituent. They know beyond a shadow of a doubt, Madam Speaker, they're not going to get $75 million this year, right? Nor next year, nor the year after. But yet they put that in the budget to affect their overall projections. It seems to be, I wouldn't even call it voodoo economics. It's just irresponsible posturing. But let's just buy their argument for a moment, because some people may not know Grand Bahama, other than just a number of people in cabinet, right? And so let's say for a moment, they are able to take control of GBPA. Madam Speaker, the member for Tall Pines, and I would yield so that he could clarify it. He lives in Grand Bahama. He abandoned us and gone in Tall Pines, but that aside, he lives in Grand Bahama. I know he loves Grand Bahama. He would be able to tell you, I'm sure he's told his colleagues, GBPA have shares or assets to produce $75 million, right? Times 3, right? So think about this for a moment, Madam Speaker. GBPA, in its previous life, had a number of revenue-generating assets. The Progressive Liberal Party, the people, the ones who like to say they hear the dry tears from every eye, they had the ability, Madam Speaker, to ensure that they did not, that is, GBPA did not farm off all of the revenue-generating companies that they have farmed off. So they took the electricity, that was privatized. The PLP is in government. The water, privatized. The same owners the same persons running GBPA are the persons who own the water company. But those funds are ring-fenced in a private company, so what the government has said they're going after to get that money, they can't go to the water company and get it. They can't go to the electricity company and get it. They can't go to sanitation services and get it. They can't go to the developers, those persons who maintain the various areas in Freeport and get it. So all of the revenue-generating parts of GBPA under the Progressive Liberal Party was privatized. And yet they look at us and tell stories that are unkind, that we are fighting for GBPA. Listen, we want either a wholesale change in shareholders or a partial, but what we want is more Bahamians to be able to become shareholders. We want the licensees to be given priorities. Priority as being shareholders. We want a reconfiguration. We want persons with deep pockets and willingness to spend to maintain and transform Grand Bahama. That's what our commitment is. They have no more love for Grand Bahama than we do. And they have a worse track record than we do. All of the revenue-generating components have been privatized under the Progressive Liberal Party. So where they can get the money from? But I said all of that to say this. Why put it in the budget when you know you're not going to get $75 million this year, next year, or the year that follows, even if you took over GBPA? So it's just irresponsible budgeting. I mean, so it's a game. It's an attempt to convince people that, we are for our people. We going after the foreigners, even though some of the folks who run the thing, they behaviors. But that aside, they have gone as far as to accuse some of us on this side of having worked there. The only group that have somebody who's a former vice president of GBPA is on that side. I never worked for it. My wife never worked for it. They worked for it. No less than the minister of Grand Bahama was the vice.
Really?
Vice chair.
No, that.
So I'm just saying, let's talk real to the Bahamian public. The so-called people's government allow them to privatize the assets. So we know that that's a game. Madam Speaker, for a moment, so I just want to say in terms of that particular matter with GBPA, the revenue that they get is for maintenance of areas and then business license fees. Is that correct, Tall Pines? Those are the two revenue streams. So it's no big money. And obviously they're having some challenges because I still get some potholes through my corner. Please, I live in Derby 1. I just swing through and and take care of that matter. Don't be like the government. The government have potholes all over the place. You could be better than them today. Come through my corner, past them potholes, please. So again, it's a game that's being run on the Bahamian people, Madam Speaker, and it is most unfortunate that they are doing it. So what we need in Grandmama is real recovery. The government spent an inordinate amount of time talking about the bazaar and this incredible plan. Listen, I've been a Pan-Africanist all my life, right? So I welcome the injection of additional capital from Africa, from the Caribbean, from Asia, from Europe. It doesn't really matter. Long as it's free and clear of criminal origins, bring the money. Invest in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. But what is disgusting about what the government has done? And if I'm wrong, I humbly will withdraw my statement and apologize. But can the government lay on the table of the House any record to show that they have engaged the shareholders relative to the acquisition of the bazaar and the surrounding properties? Anything. I mean, just anything, I would come and apologize. But as far as I'm aware, one particular person was called. Certainly, the various shareholders have not been engaged. Not who any number of persons are talking to. They have not been engaged in any serious discussion. There's no sales agreement, to the best of my knowledge, that's been generated. So how is this amazing plan conceived, promised, but there's no advanced discussion or this real serious discussion except with one individual? I don't want to call their name in here. I'll just say the initials are CP. Outside of that particular discussion, we don't know who all these other people are. And we know, and it does seem bizarre. That's good. So again, why do that? Why come in here and talk about these advanced discussions and that the deal has been in? Just let's lay the document. Just give us a sense of what it is. Invite us to one of the meetings with the shareholders. That's the best way. We live on the island. We represent the majority of residents on the island. We would be willing to go to the meeting. So again, I just want to say to the Bahamian public, while they laugh at failure to be transparent about what discussions they have, anyone could put together a glossy thing and come and show this is what we are about to do. And at the end of the day, the thing don't happen. It's and so again, we are very much concerned about the government's promise with respect to the bazaar, because as far as we know, they haven't had any real serious discussion that is presently leading to the transformation of that particular area. And if anybody knows differently, I would be more than happy to yield so that you're able to explain it, as long as we could stop the clock. I have an hour and a half left, and so we'd appreciate that. And so, Madam Speaker, no real effort to purchase the bazaar and the surrounding areas, to the best of our knowledge, is afoot, right? Now, I don't want to get into too much of this flip-flopping business that the government has engaged in before, because I think my colleague has addressed that. But Madam Speaker, I can't help but raise this issue of national insurance. The member for Pinewood raised it earlier. He talked about the importance of the solvency of the fund and the need to raise rates. The Prime Minister rebuffed him, I mean, almost immediately thereafter. And then he switched out ministers. We understood why. They were getting in trouble in different ministries, and he thought if he moved them around, they may repent. And so, Madam Speaker, the new minister came in and not only talked about the rate increase, but the new minister, Madam Speaker, talked about the rate increase for 20 years. There's no way, Madam Speaker, that a minister is going to leave a Tuesday meeting. And Carmichael will tell you I'm right. He's not going to leave a Tuesday meeting and come in here on a Wednesday or a Thursday and say something as our former prime ministers could fire them, like the next day. They can get fired. In fact, I want them to get fired on the spot. And we know Cat Island ain't easy. So the two of them cannot be telling the truth about the same story that's completely different. The Prime Minister then gets up and say that 20-year increase that he was talking about, he don't know nothing about it. Now, how is it possible for the minister to make such a huge announcement about a lifeline, a safety net for our citizens, particularly at the most vulnerable. And nothing has happened. I mean, this ain't the first time there's been this level of contradiction. And so in this budget debate, we expected that there would have been proper clarification on what happened in that case. This is similar to the hedge. One person didn't know nothing about it, 8 times, and until the evidence came, then all of a sudden they had an epiphany, a revelation. The Holy Spirit spoke to them, and they found out. And then the prime minister was then thrown under the bus. It's just too much flip-flopping on positions, too much changing of stories. And so we think that because your word is so important as members of government, you have to be consistent in what you say to the public, because if you say something that's wrong about how you are managing the finances of the country, it rattled the credit markets locally and internationally. If people do not believe you have a proper fiscal or economic plan, at the end of the day, they're not going to take you seriously. But you don't pay the price. Miss Johnson, who lived in Bass Lane, pays the price. The person who lives in Balls Alley pays the price. The person who lives in Yellow Elder pays the price when we don't get it right. And so I'm just admonishing the government. It is important to be transparent, to be open, and to be honest with respect to the management of our finances. Madam Speaker, the Davis administration promised us better in the blue economy. And although they have created major issues that have affected negatively the blue economy, they continue to tout their commitment to this sector. We have seen a yachting industry that has been devastated by the decisions of this administration. Persons who are coming in, hiring Bahamians when they're here. When they leave their boat here, we make a lot more money. We have practically driven that business to other Caribbean countries and seem not to be willing to have discussions with the various marinas about how the government can work collaboratively with them to ensure that that sector thrives and the Bahamian people benefit. It is not too late for the government to have a discussion. Now, the government is exceptionally good at setting a multi-agency task force to raid the marinas, say it's voluntary, but the way in which it's executed reeks of something other than voluntary. And we have no problem in insisting that persons are compliant with customs, with immigration, with national insurance, with the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and all the other agencies. But the manner in which we execute the job, again, affects the viability of these businesses that have been put under duress. You remember the government went to the insurance sector and really, in a sense, bullying them to invest 75% put 75% of their investments in government bonds, right? I mean, it's remarkable that the government would seek to do that to a private sector industry that could have rendered them insolvent if for example, things had gone south. This government is making it increasingly difficult to do business in the Bahamas. This cannot augur well for the further development and cooperation of the business community with the government, small, medium, and large-scale businesses. But the maritime industry, again, no doubt we have an opportunity. We recently discussed the various fees that were levied against boaters in the Bahamas. We thought that the government should have paused, should have paused on the matter and reversed a number of the rates, because we believe your failure to do so is causing a loss of business. And so we believe that a number of the policies that are being put in place are confusing for many of the yachts that come to the Bahamas. In fact, we just got a note before coming here from pilots who are facing, I think there's some extremely high increase in fees for pilots who come here who, in fact, they are part of the relief effort like yachters for the Bahamas. During the hurricane, after the hurricane, yachters, boaters in general, persons who fly in, they were part of our first responders in helping the Bahamas get back on its feet. And so we want everybody to pay their fair share, but we should be wise in how we execute business because of the potential loss of business It, read what? Yeah, I read the speech that I brought, and it tells me, it tells me, because we consult and you don't, the sector is saying to you, the sector is saying to you that the decisions that you are making are not good decisions. And so again, if Madam Speaker gives me the extra time, I want to go in detail in terms of some of the recommendations that have been made so that we could benefit this sector. But I want to talk about the tourism numbers just before I take my seat, because this is an important subject. The member for Exuma continues to talk about the tremendous growth in the tourism industry. The member loves to talk about how we are now at, according to him, we're 9 million. By the end of the year, we can be at 12 million. What he has not been able to do for the public, he's not been able to properly explain where the real money is coming from. It's coming from stopover visitors. Are we grateful for cruise ships? Of course we are. Are they beneficial to the Bahamas? In many ways they are. However, the minister should be transparent about what he believes to be the real impact of the growth of cruise passengers and a decline in real terms of the stopover visitors in terms of their impact on our tourism product. And so I just want to read a couple of things into the record for the members of the public. The first is I want to touch on the hotel, the airport, and then transition to the cruise passengers. The member for Exuma and Ragged Island promised us that he was going to sell the hotel. He was the primary spokesperson for the Prime Minister. And he came in here and he had that big song and dance, all of you bombed on the desk. And you all were excited because he didn't say he was going to sell the hotel that day. You remember South and Central Eleuthera? He said it was sold. Right. The deal was done. That we failed when we were in government. Only to find out...
No deal.
No deal. And so we were deeply disappointed after getting extremely excited, Madam Speaker, that there was no deal. It's now 2.5 years later. He had more time to sell the hotel than we had after Dorian, and they still have not been able to sell the hotel. What's worse, Madam Speaker, is that they've been working on the airport. They wish to convince us that they've done a yeoman's task in simply renovating the domestic side of the airport. But they have failed to execute the deal, even though they have credible builders, a credible partner in place. The infighting in the PLP is slowing down the development of the airport in Grand Bahama. The infighting. The Prime Minister has to manage the Minister of Tourism and the Attorney General in order to ensure that deal is finally executed. It is in. I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to do what Freetown attempted to do the other day. Madam Speaker, all of us agree that tourism is our primary driver of our economy by far. It provides the largest number of jobs, and ultimately, it is also the largest source of revenue for our Treasury, by far. That is why, Madam Speaker, we are so delighted to hear that tourism has rebounded after the devastating pandemic that decimated the tourism-dependent economies around the world. Madam Speaker, it is so encouraging to see taxi drivers working, straw vendors and wood carvers and others that are working. But, Madam Speaker, one of the things that concern us, Madam Speaker, is that the government is not being transparent about the tourists that are coming to the Bahamas and the full mix of how many of them are cruise passengers and how many of them are stopover visitors and what that means to our economy. And so, Madam Speaker, I just want to leave some information for members of the public to consider. Madam Speaker, we have all been listening intently with much interest to the record-breaking visitor numbers being trumpeted for tourism, 8 million, 9.6 million. And on recent occasions, we've been assured that the Bahamas will break the 10 million arrival mark at the end of this calendar year, and they bombed the desk, breaking up already badly damaged desks. The Bahamas has long been regarded as a tourism champion in this region. In fact, continues to head the tourism cabinet position at CARICOM. In our part of the world, when it comes to tourism, our team at the Ministry of Tourism has been regarded as the subject matter experts. But people are overtaking us in a number of significant areas. So while we beat our chests, we have to get serious about doing the work and having a real conversation with the Bahamian people about the challenges we face in that sector. Think about this for a moment. Think about it. As the cruise passengers increase in significant numbers, South Andres, the main place that tourists come to the Bahamas from is the eastern seaboard. Florida is the leader by state. And the growth of tourists coming to us from Florida as stopover visitors over the last 10 plus years has continually declined. Think about it. Cruise passengers numbers go up, stopover visitors from our #1 partner in Florida heads in a different direction. In fact, what we do not tell the public when we are boasting about these numbers is that the majority of the people that you're counting, they are cruise passengers, and you seem to be counting persons who come on the ship as opposed to count for the public those who come off the ship and spend. That number should be explained to the general public as well and what that means for the economic viability of our citizens. We should also explain to the public that the more tourists, the more cruise ships build their private ports, the money circulates less to the Bahamian people because they come here and head to their private island and ports. So nothing's wrong with celebrating an increased number of persons coming, but let's celebrate more people coming off the boat. Let's celebrate more persons coming to the destination and moving through these locales as opposed to celebrating the fact that you know a narrow amount of funds is going to the various tourist destinations, the private islands that they own and control. In May 2023, the government projected the economic growth at 5.5%. In December 2023, we were announcing record-shattering visitors' arrival. But by December of 2023, the government reduced, as I mentioned earlier, the forecast of growth to 1.1%. Now we see the government revenue will miss the budget targets for the fiscal year of 200 to 300 million. If tourism accounts for more than half of our economy, and we keep announcing record-breaking visitor arrivals, why is it that we keep reducing our estimates and missing our revenue forecasts? So I wanted to raise this issue because I keep hearing the chest beating and the desk bombing. But how is it possible that the numbers keep going up, but the revenue that trickles into this society continues to decline? We continue to miss our numbers. Madam Speaker, last December, in his address to the Bahamas Hotel and Tourism Association's annual general meeting, the Prime Minister went out of his way to say, the Bahamas is in the tourism industry for economic prosperity. It's not just about visitor numbers, it is about how much we earn and how these earnings are distributed. It is clear to the Prime Minister and to his treasurer that the visitor arrivals being celebrated aren't delivering the benefits to our people, our economy, nor to the Treasury. That's why diversification is necessary, and that's why we should be measured when we start talking about these tourist arrivals and bombing the desks for something that's not producing the results you wish to give the public the impression that it is. As one of the writers put it, a little bit more bluntly in the Nassau Guardian, letter to the editor on February 22nd, 24, this is the worst economic boom I ever see. Think about that. For all of the conversations of being ahead of revenue projections and doing so well, it is not trickling down. Plenty people on this road ain't eating. And those who eating are generally the generals, but the foot soldiers can't get a break. In examining which job fair? You having one in the Lucha? No problem. Take advantage of it now. In 2 years, I mean, we'll be able to offer you a job. Yeah, in examining the central bank statistics more closely, Madam Speaker, it turned out that the answer is plain for all to see. What we see is that all of the record-setting growth of visitor arrivals in 2023 came from the cruise passengers who spend less than $75 per person. On the other hand, our stopover visitors, who spend on average more than $2,000 per person, did not grow by one visitor, not one. And if you find a few, I'd be more than happy to modify that statement. So let me know later. The average stopover visitor, who spends 28 times more than the average cruise passenger, according to the central bank, did not grow by one visitor. To reiterate the point again, Madam Speaker, all of the growth that we have been celebrating is coming from cruise passengers that spend less than $75 per person. Those visitors that spend more than $2,000 per person did not grow at all. Now, we are grateful for all, whether it's cruise or stopover. But just to put it in context, so we could reduce bombing on the desk with such intensity. Save your strength to go attract some stopover visitors. There is now incontrovertible evidence, Madam Speaker, that what is really happening is that visitors that used to fly to the Bahamas and stay in our resorts are now choosing to cruise to the Bahamas rather than fly to the Bahamas. That's why pilots are also concerned. We are substituting visitors who spend less than $75 per person for visitors who used to spend more than $2,000 per person. That is a large part of the reason that our stopover visitors did not grow. How do we know that? It's easy. When we look, Madam Speaker, at the past 20 years, stopover visitors from the United States grew by 13%. When we look at the past 20 years, stopover visitors from the state of Florida declined. How is it possible for stopover visitors from Florida, the third largest state with the fastest growing population, grew by 0%? The answer is revealed when we look at which state is the largest source of cruise passengers. It is none other than Florida. Floridians in particular are choosing to cruise to the Bahamas and often to the private islands, not dropping here and moving all through the community, but to the private islands. Florida is the starkest example, but the evidence suggests that same is happening for other states also, especially those along the eastern seaboard, the main source of our tourists. And so before you dismiss us politically, your experts should just look at how do we counter this. It's in our collective interest for us to do so. Yes, visitors that once stayed in our hotels and spent more than $2,000 are now coming to the Bahamas to spend less than $75. Remember, Madam Speaker, we are in the business of counting cruise passengers, not cruise visitors. Cruise passengers are those that board their ships in the United States. Cruise visitors are those that get off the ships and contribute to the economy. That's what we should be aiming for. So in 2023, there were 2 million more cruise passengers docked at private islands of cruise companies than docked in Nassau. Let me repeat it again. In 2023, there were 2 million more cruise passengers docked at private islands of cruise companies than docked in Nassau. 2 million. Those private islands employ fewer than 1,000 Bahamians receive 2 million more visitors than Nassau, New Providence, where more than 150,000 of our workers live. Still worse, Madam Speaker, millions of the cruise passengers that do dock in Nassau and Freeport never leave the ship to set foot on New Providence and Grand Bahama. That's why we said in this budget debate, provide more funding through the budget. We don't see evidence of it in this budget, to entrepreneurs who can stand up enterprises that would attract the tourists to come off the ship. And then manage properly the crime problem and the fear of crime so that persons will not be subjected to many times the bias advisories that are given out by the United States and by other countries. Madam Speaker, the accommodations for these passengers who are coming to Bahamas is on the ship. Their entertainment is on the ship. Their restaurants are on the ship. Their bars are on the ship. Their casino are on the ship. Even their water slides are on some of the ships. And when they leave the ship at Nassau and Freeport, they are on land for a maximum of 8 hours. By 6 p.m. every day, the Nassau Port and Freeport Cruise Port are tourist dead zones. Madam Speaker, I take no pleasure in raising this. I'm only saying that this government fails to have realistic conversation with the population about what the challenges are. You boast about revenue, but yet people are not feeling it, they are hurting. And we're not able to meet some of the most basic needs in different sectors of the economy. You boast about the massive record-breaking tourist numbers, but never discuss with the public that we need proper linkages between tourism and other productive sectors of the society so the money can reach the persons who live through the corners where I grew up, in Key West Street and Washington Street and 7th Street and Melbourne Road and Yellow Elder and Mount Pleasant Village. Those persons who want to eat but are having challenges. The simple fact, Madam Speaker, is that we are busy counting millions of cruise passengers that never visit Nassau and Freeport, millions of cruise passengers that never leave their ships. And when they do, they leave for a short period of time. Madam Speaker, recall that stopover visitors, those that arrive mostly by air, spend an average of 28 times more than the average cruise visitors. Recall also that in our record-breaking year of 2023, our stopover visitors, most of which are hotel visitors, who arrived overwhelmingly by air, did not grow by one more visitor. Madam Speaker. Okay. Just please lay it on the table. Madam Speaker, most of those stopover visitors spent their money in New Providence, where 75% of our fellow Bahamians live and work. Madam Speaker, let me break down what our competitors are doing, just for the benefit of Tall Pines. Stopover visitors in the Turks and Caicos grew by 36%. Stopovers in Curacao by 26%. Stopovers in Dominican Republic grew by 25%. St. Martin, 24%. Stopover visitors in the U.S. Virgin Islands grew by 22%. When you give your speech, you say the numbers. Stopover in Aruba grew by 11%. Stopover visitors in Jamaica grew by 8%.
Members,
Stopover visitors in the Bahamas
they're not allowed
grew
to make noise.
by... But I remember the member for tourism say, if they feel it, you respond. They just responded. And so, Madam, no, I say stopover visitors grew by 0%. That's what I said. And so, Madam Speaker, we have a lot of work to do, Madam Speaker. The Free National Movement, when given a chance to govern in 2025 or 2026, Madam Speaker, we will be different than this administration. Madam Speaker, we are different than them, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and just before I wrap up, Madam Speaker, I want to send condolences to the Gibson Lockhart family on the passing of MCM Shanina Gibson, who many of us in here know. That's Wayne Monroe, the member for Freetown, and myself, our cousin. And so we pray for the immediate family. Madam Speaker, while preparing for the day, my daughter was graduating from primary school in grade 6. And I just want to say to Michaela, Daddy loves you. I'm proud of you. And Madam Speaker, Cousin Wayne Monroe, for all of his bad treatment of his cousin, is going to send a graduation gift. And unlike the last time I was in the House, Madam Speaker, he tried to call the police for me, Madam Speaker. But I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you. We love the officer, and I did whisper to the officer. I say, sir, you know, you can need more than you to carry me, right? So, but again, we know they were doing a job they should have never been given to do. But Madam Speaker, let me close, Madam Speaker, by simply saying, Madam Speaker, that this budget was very much uninspiring. The government squandered an opportunity. You've been blessed with a tremendous amount of resources in VAT revenue, and you have failed to utilize it in a way that can be transformative. And so we want to say to the Bahamian people that given an opportunity to govern, we will be transparent in how we manage your money. We will tell you how we are managing your money. We will ask your advice in advance of spending your money so that you could help guide the process. And so I want to say, Marco City, Madam Speaker, we will vote for this budget, but we will take this government to task in the head for a number of decisions that they make that show that they have mixed up priorities. Spending reveals your priorities. And when you look at how the government has spent the money, their priority is not putting together a proper fiscal plan and an economic plan to grow this economy in a manner that it would empower more Bahamians. Marco City supports the budget, and we are preparing, Madam Speaker, to replace this administration, 2025 or 2026.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Asmini? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Long Island.
Rise on a point of clarification. Madam Speaker, I heard the member for South and Central, Eleuthera, today, speaking about the water situation in Eleuthera, and I just want to clarify 1 or 2 points. Madam Speaker, you said that there was a contract signed in 2021. The reality is, Madam Speaker, there was a contract extension signed, not by myself, of course, not by myself. However, Madam Speaker, Michael, allow me. However, Madam Speaker, the reason why, Madam Speaker, in April, Madam Speaker, protect me from these members. I just want to make my point. I want to make my point, Madam Speaker. Protect me from these members. Madam Speaker, in April of 2021, Madam Speaker, or at least prior to April 2021, Aqua Design had made a number of threats to the government of the Bahamas, threatening to terminate or cut water off in various islands. A letter, and I want to lay a couple of documents. A letter was issued from the Ministry of Finance.
Madam Speaker, just before you leave. Sorry, Madam Speaker, in my exuberance, I know you would want to know this. In the gallery, a number of our supporters, including members from the Senate. Madam Speaker, these are persons, Madam Speaker, who will be a part of ushering in the change. I want us to acknowledge them. Members, could you just please stand? Members of the Free National Movement, all of you, our president of our Women's Association. Sorry, those in uniform, if you'd like to stand, you can feel free. But thank you very much for coming.
Now you owe me a minute, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to continue on the sheet. Yeah. Huh? No, man. Hey, Michael was my old lecturer, man. We got nothing but love for Michael.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, firstly, before I